Well, welcome everyone to the Herbert C. Kelman seminar on international conflict. And we're so happy that you've decided to spend this hour of your busy day being with us. And I can pretty much say, I'm going to promise you're not going to be unhappy that you came today, because we have a wonderful group of presenters. And the title of this seminar is "How Does the Media Find Peace, Room for Peace in a World of Nonstop Conflict?" So it's right where we are today, and no matter where you're from in the world, and I know many people are joining us from all over the world, we're all immersed in these conflicts. So it's I think, a very timely talk, and I'm so excited that our journalist friends have been agreed to come and give a talk. A couple of things that I want to say about the seminar before we get started. It's co-sponsored by the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School and the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs, also at Harvard. And I wanted to tell you that this seminar is being recorded. So if you want to hear it again, or you have some friends who might want to hear it, wait a couple of days and go on the Program on Negotiation website, and you'll find the Herbert C. Kelman seminar, and you'll find this recording. Also, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, please do it in the Q&A function. We always have a tough time because there's never enough time for all the questions. I just want to say in advance, if we don't get to yours, I'm sorry. But we're trying to figure out how to respond to these questions in a way where maybe we group them together. In any case, let me just start here by introducing our three guests. We have Jamil Simon, who is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, communications expert, and lifelong peace activist. He was a conscientious objector in the Vietnam War. Through his media production and consulting firm, Spectrum Media, Jamil has made films about sustainable development, education, nutrition, and child health. In partnership with the multilateral organizations like USAID and the World Bank, Jamil has worked in Africa, Europe, Asia, Latin America, promoting social and environmental reform through documentary film and public awareness projects. He's promoted sustainable agriculture in Malawi, conflict resolution skills in Jordan, democracy in Mali, and water conservation in Tunisia. In 2017, he founded Making Peace Visible and was later awarded the 2019 Luxembourg Peace Prize for his work promoting global awareness of peace efforts through the MPV initiative. So we're so happy to have Jamil. Also, one of his colleagues, Andrea Muraskin, is a freelance audio producer and writer with over a decade of experience in public radio broadcasting. She was a founding producer reporter for Side Effects Public Media, a public health reporting collaborative based in Indianapolis, Indiana, WFYI, and the founding producer for Next, a regional public radio show based in Hartford, Connecticut. She's currently writes the weekly newsletter for NPR's Health Desk. Andrea produces bi-weekly podcasts for Making Peace Possible and writes for its Twitter account and newsletter. So we're thrilled to have her too. And as if that weren't enough, we have one more wonderful guest whose name is Stephen Youngblood, and he's the director of the Center for Global Peace Journalism in Kansas City. He's also the editor of the Peace Journalist magazine, and he is a three-time Fulbright scholar. And in fact, today, he's coming to us from Moldova, where he's finishing up his final year as a Fulbright scholar there. So I'm just going to turn this over to Jamil. And once the three speakers have had a chance to give their comments, we're going to open it up to you with a Q&A. Thanks. Jamil, it's yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Donna. It's a pleasure to be working together again on this important topic and with the program on negotiation and the Weatherhead Center. Anyway, and it's a special, for me, it's a special pleasure to be sharing the podium with my two terrific colleagues, Stephen and Andrea. So let me just give me a minute. I'll share my screen and we'll get started. Okay. Making Peace Visible began with a story. Between the years of 2009 and 2014, I was working on producing a documentary film about a remarkable peace process that had been taking place in Burundi. And as you may know, Burundi suffered from the same kind of horrific ethnic violence as its neighbor, Rwanda. And I learned about a group of peace builders who were training thousands of people in Burundi in conflict resolution skills. They worked with leaders from different domains, the military, politics, religion, youth, civil society, and this effort was having an impact. And I wanted to make a documentary film about it. But every time I said to someone that I wanted to make a film about peace building in Burundi, people would look at me kind of quizzically and say, "What's peace building? And where's Burundi?" And I wasn't surprised that people didn't know where Burundi was, but the fact that they didn't know what peace building is, that was concerning. Most of the people in this audience know that peace building is an effective practice for the mitigation of war and violence, but few people have ever heard the word, and even fewer understand what it is. So to underline this point, there's an article in our journal, Nuance, which I invite you to check out, that reveals that the word peace building is in fact largely absent from news coverage. Out of 37,000 articles in a database about war from 2011 to 2023, the word diplomacy appeared 5,000 times. The word peace building appeared 31 times, 31 times in millions of words. So it occurred to me that if the public doesn't know what it takes to build and sustain peace, it's hard for people to believe that peace is actually possible. And I think that's a real problem. So this is how I see it. We're in a negative cycle. The peace building is hardly ever reported on any platform. It isn't seen as a solution to conflict, and the practice is minimally resourced and supported. And as a result, the scarce resources limit what it can do, and we're left with very few stories to report about. So that's the negative cycle, and it's been that way for a long time. We would like to push the world towards a positive cycle where the media focuses more attention on peace building. Peace building gains visibility as a solution, and there's an increase in professional training and resources. And with that increase in resources, there's more peaceful outcomes. And lo and behold, there's more stories to tell. So that's what we're pushing towards. That's our mission in a nutshell. But reporting on peace is not easy. There's serious challenges. I mean, basically violence sells, peace doesn't. War and violence are immediate, and peace and reconciliation are incremental. They happen slowly over time. And so peace lacks urgency. And in some ways, peace is truly invisible. But you have to dig for the stories. The stories are there. There are compelling stories about people. You don't have to carry a gun to be a hero. There are heroes around the world who are working to prevent or reduce violence. So that's really where our project began, with this mission of elevating the work of peace builders. So it's now called Making Peace Visible. It used to be called War Stories, Peace Stories. But it began in 2018. I launched this project, and it began as a symposium. And it was held at the New York Times Center in New York City. And we brought together journalists and peace builders for an unprecedented opportunity to connect on these issues. This short video captures the essence of the the conversation that we started that day. So let me play it for you.
Journalists, editors, filmmakers, students, peace builders, thank you all so much for coming today for what I know will be a remarkable conversation about the power of stories to help end war and build peace.
And I'm curious how you think the media might be able to better cover and entice audience appetite.
Some of the conceptions about how peace is made ignores the lived reality of an awful lot of people.
Looking for those places where people are trying to intervene before the conflict happens.
I think that in war, life stops. You know, there is no food, no jobs, no marriage, no love, no divorces, no birthday parties, but they all happen. So we don't report that. And we're underestimating the importance of what women are doing to keep life going.
What is a good story? Does it have people in it? Does it have a story arc? Does it have tension in it?
The problem is bad news happens suddenly and good news happens incrementally. Ultimately, the most compelling and important topic is this idea of human dignity.
So the symposium demonstrated a number of important things. I mean, for one thing, it journalists and peace builders were eager to continue these conversations. I mean, it was the first time it had ever been held. And it also showed journalists how compelling peace stories can actually be. And the symposium also addressed some additional key questions, like, you know, how does the news media inflame conflict? What voices are we hearing? I'll give you a hint. It's mostly generals, very few victims, and too few peace advocates. What can journalists learn from peace builders? What can peace builders learn from journalists about communicating their stories? You know, so there was really a wonderful, vibrant exchange. And then the pandemic happened, and now, you know, we switched to, you know, pivoted to working on a digital platform and continuing the conversation through a variety of media, including the podcast, our journal, Nuance, Peace Docs, and the education that we're creating. So here are some of the tools we're using to reach people. We have the Making Peace Visible podcast, which is doing wonderfully. There are 45 episodes now available on all the platforms. And there's a new one coming out just today with an interview with Bill Urey, which is the founder of PON, which most people know. We are also publishing the first issue of a wonderful journal called Nuance. It happens to be Nuance is what's missing from most reporting on peace and conflict. And we're publishing essays on and interviews with journalists, peace builders, scholars who are trying to change the narrative about peace. We also started a program called Peace Docs to celebrate the role of documentary films in telling stories about peace. You know, for a variety of reasons, documentary films are one of the best ways to tell stories about peace. And we're now very excited about Stephen Youngblood joining us to joining the Making Peace Visible team, and he's going to work with us to build a robust educational program. And we're going to do a lot of things in education that are badly needed. We're going to develop multimedia training materials for journalists to teach peace journalism. We're going to build programs to promote conflict resolution education and media literacy. And we're going to develop multimedia training materials to streamline teacher training. You know, we look at teachers the same way we look at journalists. They're a lever, they're a way of reaching many, many more people than we can reach otherwise. And so the other thing is that we're big believers in the power of events. They're important catalysts for change. And we're looking forward, if we can raise the funds, we hope to revive we hope to hold the next Making Peace Visible International Symposium in Washington, D.C. in 2025. When we do that, we want to restart the Pitching for Peace competition. That year, when we first did it, we did it in collaboration with the Pulitzer Center, and created a competition for journalists to get small grants to cover stories about peace and conflict. And we were amazed by the quality of the submissions for that. And the Pulitzer Center funded more than the 3 stories they were planning to fund. So it was very successful, and we want to revive that. And the other thing we'd like to do that we've never done before is create the Making Peace Visible Story Awards. And that's to celebrate great storytelling in peace building. Our purpose in all of this is to motivate journalists to write about peace efforts more frequently and in greater depth, and to write about war more thoughtfully. We want the public to understand that peace is a process, not an event. So here's what we think are the key imperatives. We want to engage journalists and editors are very important, very, very important, because they're the gatekeepers. They're the ones who greenlight stories about peace building or not. And so we want to sponsor projects that tell stories about peace building. We want to train peace builders to use media effectively and to tell their stories and to fund their efforts. So those are some of the critical, there are more, but those are some critical imperatives. But thank you very much. I hope you'll join us in Making Peace Visible. We need all the help we can get. And you just go to www.makingpeacevisible.org and sign on. And you can follow us on Twitter. And I've got the Twitter and Instagram pages mixed up. But in any case, we're on social media as well. So thanks again for this invitation. I look forward. And next, Andrea is going to tell you more about our podcast. We've had some wonderful interviews, and she'll brief you a little more about that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jamil. Very good. And thank you, everyone who signed on and told us where you're signing on from. It's very exciting to hear from people all over the world. So I am the podcast, I'm the podcast producer. As Jamil said, we've been working together on the Making Peace Visible podcast for about 2 years. And I thought I would bring you, in their own words, some lessons from some of our guests. We interviewed journalists, peace builders, and researchers from around the world on how to make stories about peace more visible in the media. So we're starting here with Daniel Salgar and humanizing the other. So this is kind of easier said than done, especially in a conflict zone. Daniel Salgar is a Colombian reporter. He was an editor on El Espectador, which is one of the main newspapers there, and was editing a beat called Colombia 20+, which focused and continues to focus on the peace process. He also was an editor on the Columbia Truth Commission report. And, over a decade of being in journalism, he was able to witness a shift in the mindset of journalists. And we'll listen to him right now.
Andrea, unfortunately, we're not able to hear the sound. So I don't know if you need to share sound.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was working when I shared it before. I think there's a way to do this here. Let me just try this again. Tell me if you're not hearing it. Are you still not hearing it?
Not hearing it, Andrea.
I'll just play it so that you can read it, and I'll fast forward it a little bit. So, I just want to mention that it doesn't happen in a vacuum. This is over time, multiple peace processes that failed, but, peace became a serious political concern in Colombia. And then journalists began to shift their framing to humanize the other. So, and I'm sorry that you can't hear the clips, but fortunately we can read all of them. So we also need to find the drama, and every journalist in every story needs to find the drama. Bill Urey, who you probably know is a co-founder of PON, has a new book out, Possible, and that episode is out today. So we asked him, where's the drama in peace building? A lot of people sitting around a table deliberating, and this is what he said. Okay. So, and he told us some very dramatic stories about the Colombian peace process, sending a private helicopter into the jungle to get a FARC member and bring him to Havana, with all his buddies telling him it's a trap. So there is drama in peace building if you look at it. So our next insight is to resist the narrative of focusing on a hero. This comes from Andrew Vollmer from the Frameworks Institute, which is a think tank. They did some research for Alliance for Peacebuilding with members of the American public. And this was one of the major surprising takeaways.
Heroic people who are doing good work, making a difference. And while those stories are often gripping, partly because they fit into a lot of very familiar patterns about individual heroes taking things on, the danger is that it reinforces a sense that it's not the peace building work. It's not the program that is a model of what we should be doing more. It's actually, we just happen to have this remarkable individual who I, as an individual, I couldn't do that. And we collectively, there are only so many people like that. So it's not something that you can scale up. It's not something you can replicate. So figuring out ways of thinking about collective work, about programs that exist that have people in them, of course, as key characters, individuals doing great work, but doing great work together, doing it collectively is essential to really building an idea that peace building is something that we can all be a part of and that really can be scaled up as a solution.
Thank
Sorry,
you,
Andrea
Nicole.
just jumped in. Yeah. So
Thank you for reading that.
You're welcome to do it next time.
Sure, but I'm happy to have you do it because I am actually hearing the audio, so it's a little
Oh,
you
perfect.
can go
I'll
ahead
do it
and
then.
do
I got it.
Thank you. So you know, the world is not a fairy tale. The world is not changed by villains or by heroes either exclusively. So this emphasis on collective action. And a good example of that, if you're able to see the film Fumble Talk, it's about a reconciliation process in Sierra Leone where communities came together in front of a big bonfire and had this sort of public statement of this person wronged me, this person raped me, or even killed my brother, and having a public apology. It's quite powerful. And we did an episode with Libby Hoffman on that as well. Okay, so Deborah Douglas, the director of the Solutions Journalism Hub at Northwestern University. She's a very prolific journalist. She also was an editor at The Emancipator, which is a project of the Boston Globe and Boston University. And so we talked to her about covering race, and she was in this clip talking about a project that the Emancipator did on health equity in different underrepresented communities in the US and how they went about that.
With our health equity tours, we actually hired local tour guides as field producers for those videos. We didn't want to show up in those communities like vampires. We wanted to be invited in. And so we did research, we did our own reporting because we're seasoned journalists, but we also work with the field producers to work our way to community members and thought leaders in the community who could really help us uncover the nuances of the health equity situation in those communities. A lot of times you hear people in communities around the country say, oh, you know, this national TV show came to town and talked to these people, and these people, those are the wrong people to talk to because this guy over here, or this woman over there, they've been working on that for years. We didn't want to be those people. And so there's a way, with our health equity tour. Oh,
I'm sorry, we can
again.
stop it there. I was trying to figure out a way to get my sound to play, but we'll just go on. So that's most of it. And, you know, I want to say that this idea of building trust within communities and not being extractive was echoed by international journalists, particularly Zaina Erheim, who's a Syrian journalist we had on the show who covered the Civil War. She had to deal with being referred to as a citizen journalist, even though she has a master's in journalism, had international journalists call her, asking for her to be a source. And so she recommends more collaboration with local journalists, and especially in this time of shrinking news budgets, instead of parachuting in someone from another country, work with the people who already know what they're doing and are trained on the ground. So one more quickly. This is Jack Farrell, Director of Communications for Search for Common Ground, talking about his favorite depiction of peace in the media.
I'm from Northern Ireland. I grew up in a small village on the border between the North and South. And I think one of the best TV shows depicting what peace looks like and depicting what peace building could be and should be is actually Dairy Girls. Through the lens of 4 teenagers from Northern Ireland, you can actually depict what everyday peace means, like what the indicators of success are and sort of what the challenges are that people face in an active conflict. There's a great line where they talk about they're sick and tired of hearing about peace. All they want to do is go to a disco. And I think that's the best explanation of what the challenge is with peace building, but also in the fundamental concept of why peace matters.
Well, thank you so much for bearing with me. And I want to please invite you to actually listen to these episodes yourself. There should be links in the chat. You can also find all of our episodes at makingpeacevisible.org/podcast. Please reach out to me if you're interested in being on the podcast or you want to learn more. And now I'm going to turn things over to Steve Youngblood, and he's going to talk about teaching peace journalism on the ground in Moldova, and I think he's going to tell us about a magical place called Transnistria. Did I get that right?
Yes, I don't know if I'd use the term magical, but we could certainly we can certainly debate that matter. Good evening, and it's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues from Making Peace Visible. So today, to answer the question, how do media find room for peace in a world of nonstop conflict? One of the answers I'm going to give you is peace journalism. So my answer to that question is going to be at least partly peace journalism. So I'd like to give you a little overview about what peace journalism is, and then about the challenges and opportunities for peace journalism to find room for peace. So I thought a good place to start would be just with the definition of peace journalism, since I think that it's that a lot of people aren't really familiar with it. So it's a concept that was developed in the 1960s by Dr. Johan Galtung, who died just several months ago. And he and his colleagues looked around at the journalism world around them and didn't like what they saw, particularly when it regards the way that media covered conflict. So they came up with this idea of peace journalism. That's when editors and reporters are making choices that can improve the prospects for peace. So what kinds of choices are we talking about? Well, certainly we're talking about word choices. So are we using words that exacerbate conflict, that pour gasoline on the fire, or are we instead using more neutral language? Another choice we make is framing. So how do we frame our stories? Are we telling them in such a way that it is sensational, that it glorifies the violence, that it ignores peace, or are we approaching it in a different way? So peace journalism gives peacemakers a voice while making peace initiatives and nonviolent solutions both more visible and more viable. So with your indulgence, I thought I'd take a minute, and this slide is not advancing. And give you some of the characteristics of peace journalism real quickly. So first of all, peace journalism is very proactive, looking at the sources of conflict before it becomes violent and talking about solutions. So Dr. Galtung's been talking about solutions as a part of journalism for nearly 60 years now. So peace journalism very much rejects us versus them models. So something that we see a lot of the polarizing media in the United States, and something coincidentally that I see in the polarizing media here in Moldova. So you have some very different competing narratives. Instead, peace journalism seeks to build bridges. We'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. Peace journalism rejects propaganda, regardless of the source. So before this session, I just met with a group of high school students, talking with them about what propaganda is and where they see Russian propaganda here in Moldova, which is a very major issue. Peace journalism illuminates and embraces complexity rather than just the simple. Peace journalism gives a voice to the marginalized in our communities. So everywhere, as Jamil mentioned, traditional journalism is all too often for and about elites. So peace journalism seeks to give a voice to the others in our community. Here in Moldova, the most voiceless are Roma. And in fact, a week from today, I'm starting a series of workshops about responsibly reporting Roma for Moldovan journalists. Peace journalism very much concentrates on depth and context rather than just the superficial. I think we would agree that in all too many instances that we have a tendency to cover that which is flashy rather than go into the kind of depth that I think it takes to report peace. The video that Jamil showed, the gentleman said something like, violence is breaking news, but peace happens much more slowly. Peace journalists consider the consequences of their reporting. So if I report this particular story in this way, what happens? Am I putting petrol on the fire? Am I leaving a possibility open for peace? We're very careful about the words that we select, avoiding sensational language, inflammatory language, and demonizing language. So do we say 10 people were killed, or do we say 10 people were slaughtered in a bloody massacre? Those words matter. Do we call someone a victim, or do we call them a martyr? Is it a massacre? Is it a tragedy? So the words that we use can exacerbate a bad situation, can make angry people angrier, and can make peace even less possible. We're also very careful about the images that we select. So are we using bloody, horrifying images because they're needed to tell the story, or are we using them as clickbait? Are we re-traumatizing victims with the images that we select? And finally, peace journalism provides counter narratives that debunk media created or perpetuated stereotypes, myths, and misperceptions. So think about the standard media narratives for any particular group. I just used the example in class about Africa. So I had the students make a list. When you read a story about Africa, what do you read about? And the answer is you read about famine and war and hunger and so on. So a counter narrative then would tell a different kind of story about Africa, story about African entrepreneurs or our African scholars or African musicians, something outside of the traditional narrative. So we're looking to break out of those, I think we would agree, stale patterns. So what are the challenges in peace journalism? And the challenges in general, some of that Jamil mentioned. I think in presenting peace and presenting peace journalism, one challenge is the onslaught of hate speech and dehumanizing language, especially in online forums. So here in Moldova, there's been an inundation of hate speech directed against Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees who have settled in Moldova. So I think we've seen a lot of hate speech online in the United States associated with either side in the Gaza conflict. And the cousin of the hate speech is, of course, disinformation. So the more that those who seek to disinform us, the more that they can confuse us, the more that they can make it unclear as to what is a credible source, the more that they succeed. So that's a real challenge for journalists and especially peace journalists in trying to debunk and offer counter narratives to disinformation. The ongoing us versus them. If you look at the United States, I mean, we're essentially, and this is I don't want to make an oversimplification, but let's say, I think it's safe to say that there are two very large camps in the United States, and that each camp has their own media stars and their own media outlets, and that the messages from the other side don't seem to get in. So what can we do, again, to break out of these polarizing narratives? Here in Moldova, we have the same sort of thing between pro-Russia, anti-Russia, pro-EU, and anti-EU. Bias and flag waving is an ongoing problem. So whenever there's a violent conflict, the tendency among media, whether it's American media or anyone else's media, is to wave the flag and rally behind our side, right? So breaking out of that tendency is always a challenge. And then all of this is wrapped up in political and societal polarization. So it's more than just the polarization that our politics bring to us. It's polarization along ethnic and religious lines. It's polarization even among geographical lines as well. So what are the opportunities for peace journalists to break through and to find room, as the question asks us, to find room in this world of nonstop conflict, to find room for peace? I think one thing that we can do is to spotlight both human rights abuses and humanitarian crises, to really keep our eye on these things. The NGO CARE every year publishes a list of most underreported humanitarian crises, and I encourage you to look that up. To give a voice to the voiceless is something else that we can certainly do, the marginalized in our communities. We don't have time to look at the video now, but it will be in your resources. A colleague of mine in Montreal and her students went to a Native Canadian community in the Arctic and produced a film wherein those community members are telling their own story. And I think it's just fantastic work. I hope you have time to look that up. To tell stories through a trauma-sensitive survivor lens. I believe one of the previous panelists mentioned that as well, that I think we can collectively do a much better job. Let me encourage you to look up something called the DART Center for reporting about trauma. And I think they have a lot of, I don't think they have a lot of outstanding resources for journalists. And finally, to build bridges across communities. So this is something that in some of the projects I've done that I think that we've really succeeded in. I've worked with the East-West Center on a project that's called Cross-Border Reporting, that's brought together journalists from India and Pakistan. And what we've done is we've gathered these journalists for the last 5 years. We've gathered them in Nepal and teamed them up to one Pakistani and one Indian to report stories of common interest. And the stories that they produced have been just fascinating and really transcend what they come to believe as an artificial border between their two countries. I'm working on a similar project here in Moldova. So there's a breakaway republic called Transnistria that's been de facto independent since 1993. So I did a seminar where I brought together Moldovan journalists and Transnistrian journalists with the same principle, putting them into reporting teams to work together, to build bridges across this boundary. So what I would say in conclusion is that I think we would have our heads in the sand if we didn't acknowledge that the challenges are daunting, especially during wartime. And I think sometimes the best that we can do is to not make a bad situation worse. So sometimes I have people tell me, I mean, here in Moldova, next door to Ukraine, well, what can you do to stop the war? And the answer is, of course, there's nothing we can do to stop the war. But what we can do as journalists is to put peace on the agenda, to at least acknowledge that at some point this war is going to end at the negotiating table. President Zelensky has said as much. So at minimum, to not make peace less possible, to not re-traumatize survivors, to not further polarize societies. But I do think the opportunities exist for us to more responsibly report about conflict. And I think that we can do this using peace journalism, that we can help to create an environment that's more conducive to peace. I appreciate your attendance this evening, and I look forward to your questions. Here's my contact information. Thank you so much.
Well, Steve, thank you so much. That was
my pleasure.
Wonderful. And Andrea and Jamil, you want to come back here? Jamil, turn your video on. There we go. So, I'm going to collapse a couple of these questions from our audience. I'm, particularly sensitive, as I know you all are, and most of us probably watching you, to the fact that we do have such a divided society here in the United States. And the question is, one of the questions was, well, you've got media outlets, one creating one narrative, and then other media outlets, on the opposite end of the polarized divide. And so that's just the reality. But my question is, like, if you're a journalist and let's say journalists from both sides of the divide are going into a conflict situation to report back to their media outlet, how can there be two such different interpretations of what's going on in the world? How does that work? Please shed that light for us on that difficult issue.
Yeah, I'll take it on just it's hugely challenging. I mean, the problem is and what makes it even more challenging is that it's driven by economics. It's driven by the profit margins of the big networks. And the other thing that's complicating it is the social media platforms where a lot of people are getting more and more information from social media platforms and less information from mainstream news sources. And one of the things about social media platforms is that the algorithms are designed to promote divisiveness. And, because that generates clicks, that generates activity, that gets people glued to their screens, and that's what makes money for the big social media platforms. And there's a wonderful organization that Lisa Shirk has been working on called Technology and Social Cohesion, or the Institute, something, Council or something. But basically these are mostly graduates of Meta and Google and
Is it the Institute for Humane Technology, or is that a different one?
No, it has social cohesion in the title. It's for technology and social cohesion. I think that's it. And they are working to change the rules about because that's the problem, is so much of the news that people are getting is from social media, and that's a very dangerous situation because these algorithms could do the exact opposite. The algorithms, instead of promoting divisiveness, they could be promoting social cohesion, and they're not. And I think it's incumbent on the public to really force some sort of regulation, the Congress, of course, too.
Thank you, Jamil. I'm going ahead, Andrea.
Yeah, I'd like to add an answer to your question, Donna. How can there be two completely different narratives? I think, social media is a part of it. There's not, a big part of it is just there's not an agreement on what's true, on what is the objective truth. There are deep fakes, there's AI. Even before that, there's been this, we have all these micro media outlets. We don't have big sources, and there's good and bad of that. But I have heard some people say that we're actually kind of returning to like an older model of human communication, which is the trusted source. Like, you trust the village wise person who gets the news from the next village. So I think we tend to trust in personalities and brands even more than we look for objective facts.
So Andrea, that dovetails exactly into what I was going to say, which is one of the most important solutions to all of this is media literacy, and starting with the tiniest little kids. So here in Moldova, I'm teaching everyone from 5th graders to graduate students. And I'm working with those 5th graders on disinformation, on hate speech. And you would be surprised, even at that very tender age, how sophisticated their thinking is about it. So I think that if we can raise a next generation that's more media savvy than we are, I think that's where part of the solution lies.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that the only way really is to teach media literacy and to teach conflict resolution skills to young children.
But I think even
long term, it's the best hope.
I mean, even before the skills, there's just getting kids together. Like I'm thinking about I think it's called the American Exchange Project. Paul Salman, who works for PBS, is one of the main organizers. It takes teenagers from different parts of the country, very different communities. It's a domestic exchange program. They get on Zoom, they talk about different issues, and then they actually visit each other and do service projects. So just before indoctrination sets in, to introduce you to that the other is a human being, that's huge. That's very important, I think.
Well, I agree, Andrea, and the other problem is when the children become media literate, what happens when they go back home and they have their families are polarized? You know, it's a huge systemic problem that we have here worldwide. It's not just here, but it is worldwide.
Right.
So there's a couple of people were asking when you, especially Jamil, were talking about all of the aspects of making peace visible, what you're trying to do, how you're trying to do the reporting, not us versus them, the things like all of you have actually talked about.
Mhm.
And one person asked, isn't that just good journalism? Why does it have to be special? Why isn't this just good journalism? And collapsing another question into that, what are the ethical principles of journalism in maintaining peace? So maybe some of you, one of you or all of you could comment on that, because I think it's an important question.
So I've been asked that before, are you just repackaging good journalism? And you know, if you want to call it good journalism, that's fine. The originators of peace journalism called it peace journalism, actually for very interesting reasons, because they thought that the term peace, they knew that the term peace was in itself controversial and even inflammatory, and that it would help to draw attention to the principles that they wanted to articulate. So would I have been contacted about writing a textbook called Good Journalism? Would I have taught in 31 countries and my product was good journalism? And I think the answer to that is no. So it's to me, it doesn't matter what it's called, but the packaging, you know, obviously, you know, it does have some influence.
Yeah. Andrea or Jamil, you want to comment on that?
Well, you know, we're also, we like solutions journalism is another term that we feel very comfortable with. And one of the tenets of solutions journalism is to tell the whole story, not just, and you know, and that's something that I think is good journalism. The problem is that, you know, reporters are generally short on time. You know, they only have 2 minutes or 1 minute or whatever it is. And, you know, peace building stories take longer. You know, almost any story about conflict is really too short just by definition. I mean, conflict is complicated. And if you really want to get into it, you need to put a little time into the understanding the nuance. And that's, again, loops back to the profit model or the business model that the big corporations use for them. But
Jamil, I've heard it said that war is breaking news and that peace is oozing news. And I like that.
You know, it is. I mean, but you know, the thing is that there are dramatic stories. There are people who are heroes who are working against violence and conflict, and we need to shine a light on them.
Yeah, and then also the news, you know, makes it seem like the world is a more violent place than it actually is.
That's very true. Yeah, and those of us who've worked all over the world know that. It's not, you know, the world sees, you know, when we look at CNN or NBC or whatever network we look at, we're looking like through a periscope. I mean, it's really a very narrow, very selective view of the world that we see.
And even a view that overemphasizes the polarization. Pew, just in the last month, did a series of surveys, and the headline was basically, we agree on a lot more than we thought we agreed on.
Right. That comes up time and time again. And you know, and again, that would be more true if we could change the algorithms a little bit to promote social cohesion, because there is a lot of there is
It
lot
could
more
happen,
cohesion.
right, Jamil? It could happen.
It could
They
happen.
made a choice to do it.
Yeah.
Let me get to another question, which I think is, for me, I'd love to hear your answer to this. How do you balance avoiding inflammatory reporting with reporting clearly when atrocities are happening on the ground?
Mhm. That it's a huge challenge. Steve, you want to take that one on, or?
Well, I mean, I don't think that you blank from what happened. I mean, you report, you report exactly what happened, but there's no, especially with an event like that, there's no need to sensationalize it. I was doing a seminar in Cameroon, and a young man raised his hand and said, "How do I report this? My neighbor was dragged out of his house and shot and killed in the street by the police. Now, how do I report that without making people angry?" And the answer was, well, look, you have to report it. Otherwise, it's going to be rumor and innuendo, but just don't report it in such a way that it makes things even worse by using sensational language, by being accusatory when there's not necessarily, we don't necessarily know who did it. I said, sometimes, and this was in my presentation, sometimes the best that we can do is to not make a bad situation worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add to that, you know, we spoke to Rosanna Ehrheim, who I mentioned, and also a couple of female reporters who work in Eastern Ukraine, who they pay more attention. They focus their stories on the people on the sidelines, on civilian life, on the life that continues right next to the war. And so that way you can show that there are people being affected by war who are non-combatants as well, and it's not all blood and guts all the time.
All right, one quick question, because I'm gonna turn this over to Nicole Bryant to talk about some of the upcoming events at PON. But how about this? I want to bring it back to the US. How could we get peace journalism to provide alternative coverage of the student activism encampments in universities around the US? Do you have any ideas about that?
Could you repeat that question?
Yeah, and we've got all this, activity going on campuses around, protests. How could we get peace journalism to provide an alternate coverage of these events? And what would it look like?
Well,
Well, go on ahead, Jamil.
One of the things that's been getting a lot of good attention is the student reporters that have been reporting. And that's really wonderful. That's a great thing to see because they're reporting from the inside and, they see the whole story. It's when we pigeonhole everybody into very narrow frames that we lose the value of the message that's being driven by the students.
The context is really, really important, right? So we hear about anti-Semitism in the protests. Is that 1%? Is it 10%? Is it 50%? We see the violence, especially on video news, because it's so visible. But what percentage of it is actually violent? We learned during the Black Lives Matters protests that they were 90, I don't remember the statistic, 95 or more % nonviolent. Yet what do we see on the front page? On the front page, we see a burning cop car, something like that. So I think providing the context is important. And I agree with Jamil, the voices from inside, from the students.
Yes, Steve, thank you so much. All of you, Jamil, Andrea, this has been fantastic. I wish we had more time to delve into this, but I want to turn it over to Nicole, the Managing Director of Program on Negotiation, and she's going to just share with us some upcoming events. So thank you, and thank you,
Donna,
it was a
and
pleasure.
thank you, everyone. And I'm
you so
delighted to be not just a aspiring voiceover artist, but also sometimes to come and talk about other things that PON does. We, have a variety of events and courses going on. We're actually teaching both this week and next week here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We love to see people here for our programs, and of course, at the slate of all of our events. Our next one is on May 23rd. We're planning our summer series. We're also actively working on scheduling things out for the fall. So please stay tuned for all that we've got going on. And again, we would love to see you if you would like to spend more than an hour with us for a day or a week, either online or in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So a big thanks to Donna and to all of our great panelists today. We wish you well wherever you are in the world and hope to see you very soon. Bye.